Okay, so I want to show you how to use Blender's built-in compositor. And you maybe are like, I haven't used compositor before. Maybe you've done videos and you know exactly what I'm talking about. But if you've ever done any color correction on your smartphone or used Photoshop's curves or tools, or you have done video editing, if you've ever used scopes before to adjust color, Blender actually has that built into it. In a lot of other CG programs, I'll render it out and then bring it into something like Photoshop or Affinity Photo to touch it up. But Blender has that stuff built in, and it's really cool because it just makes it that much easier. If you look along the top, you can see layout, modeling, sculpting, UV editing, texture paint, shading, animation, rendering, compositing. And so I'm going to show you in a second how that works. But first, let's talk about getting our camera set up. Now, I don't have a camera in my scene right now, and maybe you're in a similar position. So let's say I do or don't have a camera, and I'll show you the way I like to set things up to get my lighting and everything just right. So I'm going to Shift A to add a camera, just right in here. It has all the same camera settings that we're usually using. And I could move and manipulate the camera by selecting it, but the easiest way to do it to me is to go to View with the camera selected and go to Align Views. And under Align Views, we're going to say Align Active Camera to View. It's so important, Control-Alt-Numpad 0 is the hotkey. So when I click this, it's going to take wherever my current viewport is and place the camera. Now, if I want to move the camera, again, I could look at it here and select it, rotate it, get it into place, but I'm guessing what it may or may not look like. Let's instead look back through this camera, and I can change my view, and in my view settings, it says camera to view, and that means while this is checked on, I can just rotate this around, and this is now my camera. Let's turn on my lights just to see and pick a nice vantage point. This is the default Suzanne model. It's sort of a traditional Blender model. It's great because it's got all these surfaces and it's a nice way to test out some of these features. So I'm just seeing where's an interesting shadow, maybe an interesting angle for this character. I like maybe this right here. So when I've got a viewport that I like, I accidentally did that one too many times, I can reset and turn off camera to view. So now if I move or pan around, it just gets out of the camera. So I can push in it and it won't accidentally move it. I like to leave that off because maybe I want to fiddle or fits with lights and I can get back to it. I have a lot of settings in here, like I could set my lens length. One of the things I like to do is be in a viewport like this to mess with my lights and be in a viewport to see what my camera's seeing. So if I go up into the upper right-hand corner of any of these panels, you see my arrow turns into a little crosshairs. That means I can click and drag over. Maybe you've done this by accident. It's actually very easy to accidentally drag in a bunch of panels. And if that's the case, just go over the double arrows, right-click it, and say Join, Join Areas, and Join. And you can pick each direction, like which one you want to keep. So I want to keep this one. In this view, I'm going to make sure I'm looking through the camera. I'm going to hit N to turn off the side panel. I'm going to hit T to turn off the toolbar. I'm going to press this little viewport and maybe this little guy right here to just turn off every other feature. And I'm just going to zoom right in. So now this view, let's get back into it. 2, 3, let's see. Oh, gotta have this little guy. There's a hotkey for that too, but because I accidentally rotate around it. So now if I middle pan, it just sort of pans where the camera is and I can zoom in and out to get a closer look. And this represents the area my camera is currently in. I could change this if I want. So depending on the size of my image, I might decide, this is like a little printer setting, it's what it goes out as. I might decide I want it more square or change the aspect ratio. The default ultra widescreen is usually pretty safe, so I'll keep it that way for now. But these are the places I change it. And let's make sure in my render, I have set it to Eevee and I have all these turned on because we can see what ambient occlusion gives me is little shadows, bloom gives me more shadows, screen space reflections gives me more of that bounce lighting from the whole environment, which really improves everything. Motion blur I don't need because I don't have anything else. There's a ton of settings in here. If you really want to improve the quality of your shadows and things like that, we can up things like the cube and cascade size, but I'm not going to get too deep in that. I want to get into the compositor. When we open up the compositor, there's nothing in here because we haven't rendered. The compositor is designed to take my render and make some adjustments to it. So let's go up to render, and we're going to say render image. This is also why it was so important. Now, since I'm using Eevee, it was instantaneous. Also, my scene's really, really simple. So it brought up this render, and I can close that or move it off to the side. I'll probably just boot it to the side. But that's the reason we have to set up a camera, is because it's going to render from the camera. It won't render from our perspective. So now that I have a render, I can click Use Nodes. and it's going to show me this is my current render, and this is my compositor. Now it has this thing turned on that says backdrop. Nothing's happening right now, but if I Control Shift and click, it adds a viewer. If you remember back from that time in when I was showing you the shader node, if you turn on Node Wrangler and you can Control Shift and click on something, it will create a little viewer node for what you're looking at. So this shows me in the background, and I can use V and Alt V to zoom in and out. There's different controls for it. Backdrop, zoom, Alt middle mouse will pan around this image, but the regular zooming in and out happens on here. Some people like this, some people don't. I like it because I like to see my image behind me while I'm working on it. So we're gonna not think about the compositor for now because this is our render output. So I can Control right mouse, and if you have your render view open, it's gonna close. This is nice. If you have two windows open, you don't really need this viewer. You can probably just do this, and then you can look over on your other monitor where your render window is, but I don't have that kind of space, so I'm keeping it all in here. So what's cool is this render is just a preview, but we can start adding features just like we do in the shader editor to add new things. And so if I Shift A, there's a whole different set of controls here, and the best ones are all in color. So I can control my brightness and contrast, I can add curves, I even have a nice little color scopes that I might use. Let's start with hue, saturation, and value, which is a really nice one to start with on this kind of thing. So this lets me adjust the overall hue of the image if I want to add some warmth or some depth. Now, it's all kind of black and white, so there's not a lot of color in it. Let's go back and add some color, not through my model, but adding some color to my lights. Let's add a little bit of yellow here. Maybe I'll add a little bit of blue there. And what the heck? Let's get a nice purple light in the background. That'll be fun. So that'll give us a better sense of what we're doing. When I do that, I have to re-render. The hotkey is F12, or I can just come back into there. So now it's going to update that, and now I'm playing with it. So if I want to, I can adjust or shift the hue. If I push it a little warmer, I can decrease or increase the saturation of my scene, and I can darken or lighten it. And this is just really nice because it lets me make some of these adjustments to the overall image. Let's look at more of these. Color, I like to use, like I can do an exposure or a gamma. But one of my favorites is this color balance. This is, if you've ever used a film kind of like program, I love using DaVinci, and it's very similar in the way that it's doing, they're called scopes. So it kind of lets you change different factors, lift, gamma, and gain. So lift is our dark or shadow areas. A pretty conventional thing to do is to push them sort of blue, and I can either lighten or darken the shadowy kind of areas. And then our gamma is our like mid-tone. So if I bring this up, or I could bring a little bit of green into that if I want. So what it's doing is it's saying, what's the range of my color? So just bring it into the mid-tone. And then I can say, this is my gain is my highlights. So I can add more, maybe like add a little bit of yellow to my highlights. So something that's pretty common is to push blue into your shadows more. And you know, be really subtle with these, hold shift to like really drop these in just a little bit. And if I go back to my original image and I hit Control Shift click, you can see this is the original, and then this is the effect I'm getting. We can do a lot of stuff in here. In fact, if you look under color and things like exposure or gamma, brightness, contrast. So like brightness, contrast, this can start to give us some really strong image. Like I can bring up the brightness, increase that contrast, really give it a more dramatic look if I want. And any of these I don't want, I can always hit M to mute them and just hide its effect. See what some of these other ones do. A lot of these are really cool, like RGB curves. If you're more familiar with doing curve editing, so like Photoshop's levels or the Photoshop's curve editor is very similar, where I can do the overall curve, but I can say, let's control the blue. So I want the blue in the low range, and I want to drop it out in my kind of high range, like less blue in my highlights. But my red, I want a lot of red maybe in my highlights and a little less blue, like really drop the red out of my shadows. And you know, like these little curves I can do a lot to like really tone out and play with stuff in here. So let's see. There's also other things in here like that you might use, like blurs, and like I could do some cool like add a glare, see what that does for us. Look how sparkly it is. It's really fun. And these work pretty fast because they're relatively simple. So let's mix it in a little bit. Ooh. Went way too high with my mix. So it's just like, I can do, man, so many cool things in here. Fog, ghosts, or get like real stars. Oh, he's so pretty. So these are like really interesting effects that are fairly similar to like filters you might expect in other things. Glares. Oh man, these are just really fun. I can also put in distorts. Like one of my favorites is, what a movie distortion does. I haven't used that one before. Oh, it's gonna be a whole image. I don't want that. So I was gonna look for lens distortion. And lens distortion is where I can get things like chromatic aberration. So we can get that like that chroma shift. And you could take any of these real high, but who needs it that high? I'm just gonna get just a little bit of chromatic shift in here. It can be really fun. And there's a lot of like different types of tones and styles and things we can throw in there. And so we can take a relatively simple image and turn it into something pretty wacky and give it a lot more feel and more vibe. So I would say like and when you're done with all of these, the last thing to do is take your compositor and make sure it goes back out. It also to the compositor so that when I re-render it, F12, it's gonna give me my rendered version, and now I can go to image and save. And now I can save this as an image and upload it as my final project. Definitely RGB, we don't need RGBA. That includes black, like a transparency. So we don't need that. Excuse me. So this is a way of, I guess, doing some goofy stuff and using a compositor to really take what was originally, as I mentioned, a relatively dull image without it and add quite a lot of life and color and entrance to the thing. So in the next video, I'm going to show you how I'm going to use this to light and create a final render for my scene and give you a couple tips on how to present your work.